Vicki Hogarth, and welcome to Southwest Magazine. I'm joined today by renowned Campobello author Joseph Gough. Thank you for being here today, Joseph.
Thank you.
Now, I want to start by talking about a book you wrote in 1981 under a pen name, Joseph Green, that I think a lot of people already know, called Come From Away.
Right.
It was critically acclaimed at the time, and it only took you to 2021 to admit that you were the one who wrote this book that I'd love to tell people. My favorite quote comes from Acclaim's magazine that said, "Seldom has the lilt of a maritime accent been as successfully represented on the printed page as it is in this unassuming tale of a boy's coming of age on an Atlantic island." And yet, it took you 40 years to admit that this was your work of art. Why did it take so long?
The book was successful. One hindrance was I tried to get the rights from the original publishing company. It was very hard to get for a long time. Finally, I did. The other thing was it was my mother that wanted a pen name. She was afraid people on Campobello might see themselves in the characters, even though they weren't modeled on actual people. I mean, it's stuff in your subconscious growing up. It's like a garden, right? And you can grow something new out of it. It's not the same people. I think of the characters. I don't identify them with anybody. But anyway, she was concerned about that, so that was a factor for a pen name. Then I couldn't get the rights back for the longest time. My mother died at 99 a few years ago, so then I finally succeeded in getting the rights back. I published the book, still under the pen name, but it's doing all right.
The book that I have, it was a reissue from 2021, which to have a book reprinted 40 years later, I think that's a lot of authors' dreams to know that people are still buying their novel.
Well, that actually pleases me because I hoped it would have lasting value, and to that degree it does have, in all modesty, it does have some lasting value.
To what degree, though, when you're explaining Campobello's influence of this novel, did the place itself influence the things that are in the book?
You draw on what's in your head and subconscious, and obviously it's there. But the island doesn't look like Campobello. It's got a different shape. It's more like Grand Manan, and the names are all different. The layout of the village is different. All the stuff like that. And as I was saying, the characters, with the single exception of the protagonist's father, was a bit like my father. No other character is based on any person that I know. But they come out of your head. You know what it's like, fiction. Stuff comes out of your head. You make up stories. Who knows where they come from?
How did you come up with the pen name? Is there any story behind Joseph Green?
No. I wanted something simple, so
What was the buzz like on the island when this first came out? How did people respond?
Well, they didn't. Some vaguely knew there was a book of that name. Some vaguely suspected that I had written it, but for the most part, perfect, flat calm on Campobello. No repercussions. None of my mother's feared repercussions. No, nothing. The sales, I think, were in cities mostly, but I don't know where the sales were. But it sold out quickly.
Last time that you and I sat down to talk was on Campobello, and we were talking about another book you wrote under your real name called Managing Canada's Fisheries.
Right.
So what factor did your knowledge of the fishing industry play into this book?
Oh, it's basic, because the guys they're fishermen, and it's quite something. And this is pre-radar days. They're going all around in the fog through the ledges. I mean, they had brains like computers. And I used to go with my father and grandfather, and it's exciting. You're out in the fog, or maybe a storm, and let's say it's fog. You're heading for a bell buoy. You're waiting, you're hoping to see it. You're not quite sure where you are. Your senses are all alert. Your eyes are all alert. your ears, and in that sense that you're fully keyed up, you see better in the fog. Your eyes, you're more human. Your eyes are more, you're more alert to everything.
It's a beautiful coming of age story that I think anyone could relate to, whether they're from a coastal town or not, and definitely talks about the changing of an industry. And but what inspired you to write a piece of fiction to begin with?
I don't know. Who knows where this stuff comes into your head, right? And sometimes this second book that we were mentioning, an image came into my head, and later the story grew out of it. I don't know how this stuff develops.
Can we speak about that book for a minute? That's The Citadel Summit, which is a recent release, 2021.
Yes, that's right.
I haven't had a chance to read this one yet, so could you tell people at home what is the idea behind the book?
That book is a political satire. I don't think it's everybody's cup of tea, but the people who are politically minded, a lot of them really like it. This is no false modesty here. One fellow, he's a columnist, he told me it was a work of comic genius, so that made my day. But other people, I find it more difficult because it's so political. Again, it's not everybody's cup of tea. But the premise is Canada's first Indigenous Governor-General. This was before Mary Simon. It's a man, in fact. He's part Indigenous, part French. But he's the Governor-General. The Governor-Generals have, in Quebec City, at the famous Quebec Citadel, which is a fortress, they have a summer residence, a beautiful place. I know about it because I used to work for a Governor-General, and we would stay there. So he's got this residence there. Back in Ottawa, the redneck Prime Minister of Canada hates the quasi-separatist Premier of Quebec. That Premier is sponsoring an international summit at the Citadel. He's got federal permission to use the Citadel from a previous government. He's going to use this conference at the Citadel to raise the profile of Quebec internationally for future sovereignty, if it goes that far. The redneck Prime Minister has that enemy, the Premier of Quebec. He has another enemy, or a person he dislikes, within his own government, within the civil service. This fellow, the protagonist, is the deputy minister. He's a do-gooder. He's almost a socialist. Prime Minister hates him. He sends the do-gooder, whose name is Jack Salenko, to the Citadel, ostensibly to help the Premier of Quebec. The Prime Minister himself secretly has a plan that as soon as Salenko gets to the Citadel, and with the Premier of Quebec, he has a scheme to embarrass them both, to humiliate them both publicly, to get rid of them both, get them out of his hair. So that's his plan, but that is knocked off key when Quebecois nationalists invade the Citadel, capture the Prime Minister, capture the Governor-General, capture the Premier of Quebec, capture the niece of the U.S. president, or presidential contender who gets involved. So wild things happen. I won't try to explain it, but that's the premise.
What was the
people that like it like it.
What was the process like of writing it, and how long does it take to
I don't
write
know.
a book?
I don't know. Sometimes you work on. If I had to put it into regular working hours, days, it would add up to a couple of years, I think, of full-time work. But it doesn't go like that. I don't know. There's always something else to do. I'm active in a volunteer group on Campobello. Things like that take time. You know what life is like. I marvel at anyone like you who can organize their time and put out a show every day. Or it takes something that I haven't got.
Well, today we're actually going to hear you read from Come From Away specifically, and I recommend anyone at home. I bought my copy at the Whale Store here in St. Andrews, but it's at Indigo, it's at Barnes & Nobles. You can order it online or find it in a number of bookstores still. And just for the way, the story itself is beautiful,
Well,
but
thank you.
I have to tell you that your writing style is what I loved most, the way you create images, just with an ease that must come to you naturally, but you make it seem that way, and it was just beautiful to read because of the way you paint a picture.
Well, it's very pleasant to hear that. Thank you.
Can you tell people who haven't had a chance to read it before we do the excerpts, just an idea of the premise and what happens in the novel?
I can give you the first excerpt,
Sure.
and I'll try to set it up that way.
Okay.
And I wrote it all out. The story takes place in the 1950s on Palisade Island, Bay of Fundy. No connection with Campobello, Deer Island, or Grand Manan. Fishing herring for the sardine factory is the main employment, and if you're a captain, it's a big deal. But young Paul Russell, he thinks the island's too small for him, and the very day after he graduates from high school, his father wants him to help paint the boat. His mother sends him to the store. It's annoyances. He just feels held back. On the way to the store, he encounters an old woman he knows will want him to mow her lawn. So here's a quote. At sight of him, Esther Sagan stood up and came over to the fence. Just the man I wanted to see, she said. Polly, suppose you could mow this little bit of lawn for me? Probably won't have time, Esther, going on the boat. Oh, that's right, dear, and you graduated. She put her spectacles on to look at him. Going to fish herring with Jack? Not going away to school nowhere? Nope. He had no marks, but away in a good school he knew he would have learned. He might have bested the smartest pupils in the world, making inventions even before he graduated, winning every kind of scholarship. So that's what he's telling himself. He gets clear of Esther just as they both hear a car coming in the distance, and Paul knows who's behind the wheel. Harvey Pierce, who is his age, who knows about girls and is Paul's tormentor. Paul gets off the road before Harvey arrives and takes his secret path through the woods to Angel's Head. He clambered out upon the rocks of Angel's Head, across a narrow, murmuring strip of water. The flowered islet that was the bowed head itself glowed warm in the sun. Behind Paul, tall spruces made the topmost curve of the angel's wing. He looked across Palisade Passage to the purple distant woods of the mainland. I'm going away, he shouted. As if to match this moment of decision, the sky's blue suddenly seemed to turn solid and perfect. He shouted again, loud and long towards the mainland, daring himself to have no care if the village heard. I am going away. And that's one excerpt. Should I do another? Mm-hmm. But he's stuck on the island. He's going on the boat with his father, and instead of him leaving, people arrive, come from away. An American developer, name of Walter Lismer, he buys a sardine factory, and he has big ideas that ultimately would displace the Palisade fleet of independent vessels, and instead he would use big steel company-owned vessels. But that's not immediately apparent. What's immediately apparent to Paul is Lismer's daughter, Carol, who's a couple of years older than what he is. So on this particular day, the island fleet is getting underway. 24 carriers and seiners were milling towards the narrow opening between the two wharves, clearing each other by inches. With the wheel hard over, Jack powered ahead, then reversed with the wheel midships. Whirlpools and fine bubbles swirled in the green water as the Paul and David's stern angled out from the wharf. Paul went aft to coil up the stern line. Somebody on another boat gave a wolf whistle. Paul looked up and the rope stopped moving in his hands. The girl from away stood at the end of the factory wharf, sunlight outlining her slim legs through her skirt. She looked unsurprised by the whistle, her face as accepting as the water to the sun. In the way she looked, there was something like no girl he'd ever seen on Palisade. She was watching Harvey Pierce make a great flying, show-offy leap to the bow of the Rowena Sea. Should I continue? I said earlier that Paul was telling himself that Palisade is too small and narrow for him. But below that is the question whether he's up to the island. He's awkward, he wears glasses, he's never had a girlfriend, he can't handle a boat like Harvey Pierce, who's soon pursuing Carol. But Carol has also spoken kindly to Paul. And now he and his father, they're on another trip. It's stormy, a boat runs aground. Paul imagines himself making a heroic rescue. He's going to rig up a sling to get the two men off their boat, off their shipwreck, save them. Basking in the glory of that, he will ask Carol to the island dance. So here's him, he's in the pilot house. A sea shook them. He crashed laughing into the corner. Another wave pushed them sideways. Everything in the drawers and lockers hung in midair, then crashed. Confused scenes of glory flashed through Paul's mind. Smash! A right to the bully's nose. He staggered back to the wheel to give the boat perfect, controlled direction, feeling within himself whiplash forces as he steered on towards the rescue. Except Harvey Pierce and his captain get there first. They make the rescue. Paul, on his father's boat, manages to mess up the electrical system, the bilge pump, the engine, and he's left everything loose in the cuddy down forward. They almost need their own rescue, but they manage to tie up at the wharf where everybody has come down to welcome back the boat that was saved. This crowd includes Carol and Paul's cousin, Patty Lee, and the dreaded Harvey. Paul is afraid of further embarrassment, but he thinks he's safe because they're in the dark. All it is, we had a little trouble tying up, Paul told himself. Nothing to laugh about, is it? Anyways, with no deck lights, they can't see us. It'll all pass off. Starting down the cuddy hatch, Jack, his father, flicked the flashlight beam ahead. He stopped. His hand led the beam over boots, stove parts, engine parts, wires, electrical fixtures, tools, nails, sticks of wood, fishing line, leftover hash, eggs, and everything else Paul had dragged out during his cleaning up spree, and then left forgotten on the cuddy floor to roll and smash itself during the gale. At that moment, a car on the wharf turned its headlights onto the Paul and David. Another boat appeared alongside, deck lights and spotlights on. In the beams, Jack stood with arms upraised and bellowed to the rainy sky, "Ain't it awful?" Paul heard Harvey's hateful snort mingle with Carol's laughter at him and his father. He gulped back sobs and rushed for the darkness of the engine room. So he's made a fool of himself once more. And what happens next? Paul makes progress. One triumph is learning to dock the boat. It's a big deal. It's an emergency. He's got to move the vessel. He does. Success. Knowing the treachery of the boat's momentary stillness in the tide, he ran to make the bow line fast, then the stern line. Patty Lee's, his cousin, her hand reached for it from the wharf. "I didn't know you could dock this, Paul." He made no answer, only reached for his comb as he saw Carol approaching. And Patty Lee, Paul saw with lifting soul, was for some reason walking to the end of the wharf, even as Carol approached him. They were alone. He realized he had his cap on and put the comb back in his pocket. He looked down at his boots and dirty clothes. He looked at the gulls circling over the harbor. He looked at the red shingles of the factory and at the young pollock playing below in the water. Then he looked at Carol almost in the eye. "I don't suppose you'd like to go to the dance Saturday?" "Yes, Polly, I'd love to." A smile blossomed on her face as Paul's eyes turned away, hiding their load of joy. Continue? Here's a little more. Paul does take Carol to the dance. Then he messes up in ways that I won't go into, ending in a fistfight with Harvey Pierce. Meanwhile, Carol's father, his plan to redevelop the independent fleet out of existence is proceeding. And that's still secret. And he's actually being manipulated by the factory manager, name of Basiler, for Basiler's own benefit. This man is politically connected, and the whole scheme depends on the election. So now it's election day in the village. Basiler is handing out $10 bills to those voting his way, but he's trying to do that discreetly. P.P. Llewellyn came up to Basiler, and with an air of concealment that gave a twist to his whole body, he extended his palm back and sideways. With an impatient motion, Basilar reached into his pocket, slipped him a $10 bill from a huge roll of them, and disappeared into the hall as Lismer's eyes bulged. Jean Heath, she's a young wife on the island, takes all that in. It's election day, she's got a new dress. She goes over to Pee-Pee, who's her great uncle on her father's side. Uncle Pee-Pee, what kind of example are you setting me? What, dear? Taking money for voting. What you mean, dear, taking money? Just then, everybody saw you. Pee-Pee raised his voice. I got a right to vote, he announced, and I got a right to get paid for it. Jean strolled away smiling to talk with a fisherman who was home because of the election. The pint of election rum under his clean election day shirt, the fresh election $10 bill in his pocket, and Jean's election prettiness made everything about the day a reward. His weather-wrinkled eyes touched into hers as into a blossom. They both moved on to other groups, finding people they hadn't seen for a week or a month out of their lives spent together, and stories spread like the wind about each other, politics, and the factory. Those rumors wind up in a showdown, and I'll skip the details. But remember, at the start of the book, what was driving Paul Batts was the way island people were always watching him and judging him. So here's how that plays out. As the men talked, watching Basilar's face, a cautious, calm joy came over them, as when fishing they felt the net come alive. Basilar began to talk plausibly, but all his words had to match their remembrances of the summer and their knowledge of him, and never could. Living all their lives before each other's eyes had given them too many tests of judgment, tests of themselves and others. Basilar was caught, Paul realized, and they had the strength to keep him in their net. They had won by watching. So that's about all of the plot related, but here I'll just give a related passage. Here's old Alden Kilbourne. He's in the store. The island people, and Lismer's wife, the island people have nicknamed him the new producer. His wife has come into the store. Alden's just been talking to her and she's gone. She had made him remember working away that time. The people he'd seen there had been good enough but lacking texture. They would try to tell him about themselves, but still he would know nothing of the other people in the story, nothing of the parents and grandparents whose name they served, nor what had happened to them growing up. They in turn knew nothing of him, for without his reflection in the island lives around him, it was impossible to tell them. He wondered what the Lismer woman thought of Palisade. On the island there was a top layer of friendliness that belied the deeper layer of spite, suspected plots, and inbred politics that made hardcore liberals boycott Emily's store and rank conservatives boycott Bert's. The woman from away would soon learn about the pettiness. But then there was a deeper layer she might never see, thought Alden, the judgment and quick generosity that when something really bad happened, made everybody on the island like your brother and sister.
Yeah. Well, I think now everyone at home who hasn't read it knows exactly what I meant when I said it's the way you write that's just so captivating. What is it like for you to read something you wrote 40 years ago? Is it like revisiting an old part of yourself? How does it feel?
Well, I like it. I don't know. I think the book does have some value because people still like it. I still like it. And what is it like? I don't know. You watch yourself doing a good show, you know, you feel good.
I usually have to put it aside for a while.
That's the thing about writing. You have to put manuscripts aside for a good long while. I took a writing course in university with Hugh MacLennan, the novelist, and I asked him, how long should you put a manuscript aside? And he quoted some Roman saying 7 years.
7 years. And then rework it.
Yeah.
Wow. So where do you recommend people? So I said you can get them online, both your books.
Get them online.
But you can get them in a lot of bookstores too.
Go to Friar Rose Press website. We'll send you a book, or get them from the Wales store, Westminster Books in Fredericton, Indigo in St. John, Halifax, different stores. Simplest thing is probably to order it online from us.
Okay.
But, or just go to the website. On our website, Friar Rose Press, we've got easy instructions what to do, different ways to buy it.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading the Citadel Summit next. This one.
Well, I hope you like the Citadel Summit. As I said, maybe not everybody's cup of tea, but the people that like it do like it.
As a person who follows politics for my job, I have a feeling I will love it. And I will need you to sign both my copies
Great, yeah.
before you leave today.
Happy to do that.
Thank you so much for coming in today, Joseph. It's always a pleasure. And
Pleasure. It's been enjoyable.
Hopefully next
Thank
time I
you.
will see you on Campobello once again.
That'll be good.
My guest today has been Campobello author Joseph Gough, also known as Joseph Green. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO Television.